There are two metabolic states in which cells exist. The first state is the absorptive state, or also known as the fed state. This state lasts for about 4 hours after eating begins, and nutrients are being absorbed from the GI tract into the blood. Each state is controlled by hormones. For the absorptive state, the hormone is insulin. Because insulin is responsible for decreasing the amount of blood glucose, it is also known as the hypoglycemic hormone and has multiple actions. One of the most obvious actions of insulin is the facilitated diffusion of glucose into the cell from the blood. When insulin binds to its receptor, it triggers the cell to synthesize and place transport proteins on the membrane to move the glucose from the blood into the cell. In addition, insulin triggers the liver to store glucose in the form of glycogen, and this is called glycogenesis. A third action of insulin is lipogenesis. Remember, this is the synthesis of triglycerides. So during lipogenesis, you can take excess carbohydrates and excess proteins and store them in the form of triglycerides in your adipose tissue. The energy that is being made available during the absorptive state can be used to synthesize proteins. In order to have protein synthesis occur within the cell must have a readily source of amino acids. So insulin is going to increase the active transport of amino acids into the cells so that protein synthesis can occur. Lastly, insulin will inhibit anything that will increase blood glucose levels, such as gluconeogenesis. Remember, gluconeogenesis is the synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrates, such as proteins and fats. This figure summarizes the absorptive state. During the absorptive state, anabolism occurs. Amino acids are used to synthesize proteins, and excess energy is stored in the form of glycogen or triglycerides. The main energy fuel used by your cells is glucose to synthesize ATP. The liver also metabolizes amino acids. Amino acids can be converted into keto acids, and keto acids can be modified into different types of molecules such as acetyl-CoA. Remember, acetyl-CoA can be used to make fatty acids. Fatty acids plus glycerol will make triglycerides. In addition, keto acids can be used as an alternative source of energy for the synthesis of ATP. The second metabolic state in which cells can exist is called the post-absorptive state. This is called the fasting state. At this point, you are no longer absorbing nutrients from the GI tract into your blood. The post-absorptive state is controlled by hormones as well as the sympathetic nervous system. The main hormone controlling the post-absorptive state is glucagon. Because glucagon's action is to increase your blood glucose levels, glucagon is referred to as a hyperglycemic hormone. The target cells for glucagon are primarily the liver and the adipocytes. Glucagon stimulates glycogenolysis as well as the neurotransmitter epinephrine. Glycogenolysis is the hydrolysis or breakdown of glycogen into glucose. This will allow for the increase of blood glucose levels. It also stimulates the adipocytes to begin to hydrolyze or break down triglycerides into fatty acids and glycerol. Fatty acids will then be used as an alternative energy source, and glycerol can be used to synthesize glucose by way of gluconeogenesis. Remember, gluconeogenesis is the synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrates, such as fats and proteins. Other hormones released during the post-absorptive state are growth hormone, corticosteroids, sex hormones, and thyroxine. Decrease in blood sugar level can also stimulate the sympathetic nervous system to release the neurotransmitter epinephrine. The actions of epinephrine are the same or similar to the actions of the hormone glucagon. In addition, a diet high in proteins and low in carbs can stimulate the release of both glucagon and insulin. Glucagon is released in response to the low carbs, whereas insulin is released in response to the high levels of amino acids in your blood. This figure illustrates the events of the post-absorptive state. During this state, catabolism occurs. Proteins, glycogen, and triglycerides are broken down into their building blocks. The major fuel during this state will be glucose for your brain, as well as alternative energy sources such as fatty acids and ketones for other cells. Glucose levels are maintained by glycogenolysis as well as gluconeogenesis. In addition, the liver is metabolizing amino acids to convert the amino acids into glucose. This is going to involve transamination, oxidative deamination, and ketoacid modification to ultimately produce the glucose.